Welcome to the Wholesome Healing Collective.
Join us on our podcast for a journey into the hearts of healers from all walks of life, diving deep as we explore meaningful conversations that have the power to inspire, empower, and share life-changing wisdom.
Through this community, we hope to create a welcoming environment where our listeners leave feeling nurtured and uplifted. We are so delighted you are here. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Renee. Grab a drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wholesome Healing Collective. Renee and Alyssa here. And we wanted to talk to you today about our relationship to our emotions and the things that are arising in our body, how we can change our perspectives in a way that allows us to gain wisdom no matter what the emotion is that is arising. So rather than allowing some emotions and rejecting others, coming to a place where we can allow all of them and know that they're all here to serve us. How do we get that information and wisdom? That's what we're going to talk about today.
Ooh, I love this topic. And I would love to say, like the signs that say good vibes only, that is like jumping over the negative emotions and pushing those down. And so all vibes, all energies, all emotions are welcome in your life. They should be, so that you can see what needs to be looked at. Because if you're just pushing it down, saying good vibes only, then you miss that. You miss that opportunity. And what that really comes down to is spiritual bypassing those emotions, just saying we're good here and jumping over to the other side when your body really maybe is telling you and showing you in different ways that you're not good. And so we're going to try to explain how you can begin to create that awareness and then look at the body.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think so often we want to do that jump and we want to override those emotions and use our affirmations to say, we're good. Like, I'm just going to keep saying this until those feelings go away. And it's really when we get to those feelings and allow those feelings to be seen and heard and acknowledged. And then we can say, okay, now we're going to do the mental part and the mindset work after we've looked at the feelings and let them run their course. So
yes,
powerful stuff.
Mm.
I guess the first step that I would put out there as a starting point for our listeners who are like, okay, I get this conceptually, but how do we actually apply it? And really, it all starts with the awareness, right? It's being able to recognize what is arising. So being able to take that pause, and if you notice, maybe the mind is the first trigger with whatever it is that's coming up in thought, being able to see the thought and say, okay, what's the emotion underneath this? You know, if I'm feeling or if I'm having thoughts of anxiety, what is actually underneath that? Is it fear? Is it, oftentimes it's fear, especially if, anxiety is usually forward focused. We're fearful of what might come in the future. Or, are we feeling feelings of regret and really there's sadness and we need to look towards the past, or that feeling is rooted in the past. So being able to look at the thoughts and ask yourself, okay, what am I actually feeling underneath the thoughts? And then moving your awareness into a seat of observation. So if we're feeling sadness, we might be viewing the world through that lens of sadness. So how can we move our awareness to somewhere in the body or in the mind that gives us that distance to look at it, name it? That's so important, labeling it so that it isn't part of us, or it is part of us, but it's not all of us. sometimes when we're viewing the world through the lens, we'll just stay with the example of sadness. It feels like it is this whole part of us. But when we can move into awareness and say, okay, I'm feeling, a part of me is feeling sadness, it's like, okay, that's not all of me. That's just a piece. And now I can look at it with some objectivity and start to, I don't want to say analyze it, but look at it from a different perspective that allows you to gain some understanding from it. Or
Yes. Holding it lightly in the hand rather than heavy in the body, which I think we've recently said was a quote from Samantha Skelly. It's such a beautiful representation, though, that you are not your emotion. You are just simply witnessing the emotion and allowing there to be spaciousness between you and your emotion helps you to, notice that it is not actually all of you.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And then when we have that different perspective, we can start asking questions that might give us answers and wisdom that can then change the way we feel and think and ultimately our reality. So looking at, sadness, for an example, and asking questions like, what do you have to teach me? Or how can I soothe this sadness?
Mm.
And then just pausing and noticing what comes up. And maybe it's an image. Maybe you see an image of being hugged, and that sadness is like, I just want to be hugged. I just want that connection. Or maybe it's not an image and it's a word of surrender. I
Mm.
just surrender the control. And then you can look at whatever advice comes and say, okay, how can I actually implement that? Where do I need to surrender? What do I need to surrender? And then pause. The
Mm.
pausing is so important, right? Because our mind might want to spit out answers because our mind, that's what it's built for. It's a little answer seeking machine. It's like, I know, I know. But staying in the body and listening, like, what do I need to surrender?
Mm.
And letting it show you. And then we have to listen. And then we have to act like, okay, this just told me I need to surrender the control of XYZ situation. Oh, shoot. Now I actually need to do that if I want to resolve this. But at least right? At least you have this thing to move forward with instead of the mind that's like throwing out answers, or when you're in it and the sadness is there and you're viewing the world through it, it's just the poor me, or the why is this happening, or this shouldn't be happening, or I did this and that. But instead it's like, okay, moving all the story out of the mind. Okay, what's here? I really just need to surrender this
Mm.
control. And then working through what that means for you and how you act on that. And it's amazing when we start listening to the wisdom of the body, how quickly those things can start to resolve. Um, and it's not always instant, but yeah.
Mm.
What do
Yeah.
you that?
When we give our loving awareness to our emotions, to these parts of us, they'll only be around for 90 seconds. And
Mm,
that is so powerful to know that, like, I can sit with this sadness for 90 seconds. I can do that. And
yeah.
then once you soften and feel into it and get those answers, it just goes
Yeah.
away. And I know that sounds really easy and that doesn't sound scary or bad. Um, I don't know if I said that right. Like it does sound easy, and it is. Like it's not a scary or bad time as long as you can lean on your breath and just be gentle and patient with yourself and with your emotions.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because one of the the concepts as to how things get stored and trapped in the body is because when they arise, we don't allow that full cycle of feeling to occur so that we can let it run its course. It arises and we're like, oh, no, thank you. Shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. And it doesn't get to run its course. So it just stays there waiting for its opportunity, waiting for us to allow it to run that 90 seconds to just be with it. And I love the other thing that you said is that loving awareness. So it's
Mm.
not looking at it and being critical of it. It's not looking at it and saying, like, why are you here? I hate you. It's looking at it and saying, you sweet little energy of sadness. How can I love you? What do you need from me? And really having that approach of the loving parent or the unconditional love and no judgment. No
Mm.
judgment. It's so easy to judge the feelings, like especially when it's feelings of, shame, for example. It's like, I don't want to feel you anymore. You've been here for 20 years. Like, why are you here? And that judgment isn't, it's just going to perpetuate that feeling. But when we can accept ourselves and accept wholeheartedly what's here, it's like, oh, okay, I'm seen.
Mm.
That little part of me is getting seen by me. And it
Yeah.
sounds cheesy, but it's so powerful because the relationship we have with ourselves is the most important one we'll ever have.
Mm. Yes. That reminds me of when you mentioned shame. Shame specifically for me, like, was like alerted when you said this for, our guest Jana last week talked about our emotions are just an inner child.
Mm,
And some of these emotions, shame, fear, guilt, definitely those negative ones. I'm sure like happiness, joy, I don't know if that's an inner child. So there's definitely a lot to explore and learn here, but for me, when I feel guilt or shame, I know that it's triggering. It's like pulling a string for something that happened when I was 0 to 7, like Janice said, that made me feel guilty or shameful based on, how a caregiver or a friend or something reacted. And so when we um, store that in the body later in life, those strings get plucked and we feel that and we don't even know why it's here. But allowing it to be here leads us back into time, into that 0 to 7, and shows us the original memory where we can then begin to reparent, as she said, and feel that loving awareness towards our inner child and just love
yeah.
them and be patient and understanding that the reason I'm feeling this way right now is because that happened to me when I was a child. And that's so silly, almost silly to feel guilty now in this moment when there's no reason to feel guilty. It's
Yeah.
not me, it's my inner child. And so
Yeah.
spending time with that part of you too. There's like, there's all these different parts inside of this triangle, the wound, the emotion, the need, and then of course the protector who's just trying to keep you safe. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much to be said about that concept of reparenting and giving yourself that love and attention that you needed in that time. And something that stood out in what you said too is that when we have those little chords struck and that little child in us is activated and those old feelings are activated, oftentimes that's when we behave in a way that we look back and we're like, why did we do that? Where did
Mm.
that come from? Why did I react like that? And it's because it wasn't a reaction of your current mature adult self. It was a reaction of that childhood self, that inner child coming out in a way that surprises you because you're like, where did that come from? And it's because it's that little part of you that is like, hey, you're not going to ignore me anymore. Here I am in full force.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know where that come. Let's just shove it away a little bit longer until it rears up again. But that's our opportunity to say, oh, okay, I don't know why I reacted like that. I need to pause and go inward, be like, okay, who needs attention?
Mm.
And let the opportunity for that inner child to be seen and to come forth. And I'll also, one thing that's coming through too is that when we first start to develop this relationship with our inner child, depending on where you're at in the journey, if there's been all these years of not having that relationship and not um, giving that awareness, it might not happen overnight. You know, we have to build trust with ourselves, just like we have to build trust with other people and other relationships. So I've definitely worked with people who have done where we've gone inward and we've encountered an inner child, and they're like, mm-mm, I don't trust you. I'm not opening up to you.
Mm.
And we can see them and we know they're there and we know they're hurting, but they're not ready to talk to you yet. And it's important to know that it's that consistency of the love and awareness over time that will start to soften those edges and allow that opening. So if you are to start this work and maybe the first few times you either don't feel or see or nothing happens, don't give up. We're developing the ability to imagine and see these things, and maybe you do encounter that inner child and they're like, I don't want to talk to you, get out of here. And it's like, oh, well, that's discouraging. That feels like rejection from myself, right? And it's like, no, that's just a hurt, wounded child that needs you to prove your love with your
Mhm.
consistency, with your acceptance, with your non judgment. And so just stick with it if that happens to you and keep loving on that inner child, and that door will open up for sure.
Mm. I love that. And a great way to soften and send love to that inner child is just visualizing that you're sending that love, or, maybe it's not safe for you to visualize wrapping your arms around the child, but just like sending your love, sending your light. And the breath can really help to soften that, breathing into that part of you and expanding and nourishing that part of you.
Yeah.
Mm.
Nourishing. So important. I think, we talk about self care a lot and interwoven in pretty much every conversation. Um, and it's just that continuing to develop that relationship with ourselves in that self care practice that trickles over into the caring of the inner child and then the ability to care for others. So
Mm.
I think we can't emphasize enough how much we need to nourish ourselves.
Yes. Yes. The first step is awareness, acceptance being the second step. And I think that's really all this juicy stuff we've been talking about. And the third step,
Well,
awareness.
extracting the wisdom and then acting on the wisdom. Sometimes the answer is like, I just want a hug or I just want love. And it's like, okay, let me give that to you. But sometimes the answer might be, you need to go to bed an hour earlier. I
Mm.
need more sleep. And you're like, shoot, how do I do that? It could be practical, it could be impractical, but how do you then implement it so that you're listening and integrating? Because it's that action step that we take after the wisdom that then builds that trust. Because if we go to inward and we say, okay, what do we need? And we get the answer and then we completely ignore it, then
Mm.
it's like, well, why should I tell you if you're not going to listen? So building that trust through listening and actually acting on the wisdom that we receive is a big important step for sure.
Mm. And that is really powerful for the emotions and that information and wisdom you get there, but also just your intuition in general. the more
Yes.
you follow through on those inklings, those sparks, the inspiration, the more you will get that information, that wisdom from your intuition.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Anything else you want to say about this topic?
Mm. You don't have to do it alone. Yeah.
Ooh.
Like, even though this is inner work and you're going inward to reflect and extract the wisdom and then integrate what it is that you find, know that you're always still being supported by that power that is greater than you, whatever the name is that you use for that. And when we don't know what to do with the information we receive, that's where we get to go to find more guidance. And so I guess a friendly reminder to stay connected and to lean into that source of support when we don't know what to do next at any step in that process that we talked about.
Yes. And if that higher power, that greater energy feels inaccessible to you, you can always reach out to another person, like a
Mhm.
coach or a therapist or a friend to help meet that need. And I know that when I have like a feeler by myself, and I think we've talked about those, that just scanning and tracking my body, noticing what's arising for me or what needs my awareness or attention. I know it's so much more powerful when I do it with Renee. Like, it's just insane when you're doing that work with another person.
Yeah, to be witness is so powerful.
Hmm.
And sometimes when we struggle to get out of our own way in that connection, just having someone else hold that space, even if they never say a word, just gives you that little container to drop in. And it allows you to tap into their energy. You know, sometimes we're stuck in our head, but the other person, they're dropped in and they're solid. And it's like, okay, I can feel that energy and I can mirror that. And it allows me to go deeper because they're deeper with me. And the energy that we create together, uh, yeah, that can be super supportive.
Yes, being co-nourished by the people you're with. If they're nourishing, if they're more toxic people, then you probably don't want to open up and
Yes. Must have discernment with that for sure.
yeah.
Mhm.
Jana mentioned, the light and the dark, the joy and the sadness, essentially along those lines. You can't fully experience joy until you fully experienced its opposite. And, she had mentioned, how do you know it's daylight? It's because we've experienced the dark. And having that wide range of emotions and allowing them all to be here makes experiencing the more positive ones more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And joy doesn't only get to be around for 90 seconds because I feel like joy is just like this regenerative emotion. So don't feel like, oh, if I fully give joy my loving awareness that it's going to go away in 90 seconds. Just being like fully present with what it is that is bringing you joy, I really feel like amplifies that experience. And maybe you begin to radiate joy out around and spreading it to the people and to the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's that heart lock she was talking about with love. Like, those emotions are so powerful. And feeling them lets them expand and be shared.
Yeah. Tapping into that true essence, that remembrance of our core, which is love, right? And
Mm.
I feel like that's why that feeling can never be depleted because that's our frequency. Like when we strip everything else away, we're all love. And so that's what's there underneath it all, underneath the feelings that we feel for 90 seconds, and we strip all of that away. That's what we're left with, is this frequency of love that we get to rest in and radiate out.
I love that you tapped into frequency. And so frequency is different than emotions. Like you can be vibrating high and still feel a more negative emotion. You can still feel sadness or grief or even anger. And your frequency doesn't necessarily drop all the way down there because you were maybe more at that love, that joy frequency on a regular basis. But if you have, a lower vibration where you're in that anger or fear, it is pretty hard to fully allow that joy and that love to be your resting place when you're vibrating at such a low frequency. Do you want to talk more about that? Or that could even be a whole podcast episode where we talk about raising your vibration.
Yeah, I do feel like that could be a whole, like maybe that's our part two. But I think
Mm,
that kind of ties into the perspective piece, right? Like when we are able to observe what's arising from that place of observation, then we can see it without it pulling us into the frequency. But when we just dive into it and then we're completely immersed and we're viewing the world from anger or sadness, that's when it starts to bring our frequency down, because we're letting it consume us instead of letting it be just a part and held separately from our whole being.
mm. Yeah, and maybe why fear or anger or those more negative emotions, why they maybe feel like they last longer than 90 seconds is because that's that resting position is I'm stuck in that frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like you really tapped into something there, because there's probably a lot of people out there that are like, "Oh, I feel my anger and I feel it
Mhm.
all the freaking time, right?" And so what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that's really because when we let it become our frequency, we're letting the whole world be seen through the lens of anger instead of getting to the core of the anger, the seed that it stemmed from,
Mm.
and feeling that.
Mm. That's so powerful.
Yeah, so maybe we do a whole bit on, okay, how do we bring ourselves up the emotional ladder, because
Mm.
we can't just go from, not, I mean, sometimes, but oftentimes we can't go from this emotion to this emotion. We have to kind of climb our way out of it in layers, to bring ourselves up to where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be a really great topic to discuss. Um, let's maybe add a couple tips of raising your vibration before we do that so they've got something to work
Yes.
on till that comes out because we do have a couple guests set up. And so I don't know when we'll get to that part two. So some of my favorite ways to raise my vibration, I have a bajillion salt lamps, Himalayan salt lamps around my house. I burn incense and I drink a lot of water. So
Mm,
those are just three quick ones.
yes. Yeah, that's huge. Water is huge. All of that. And I think moving
Mm,
the energy, whether that is going for a run, doing yoga, doing qigong, moving with intention. So I like the visual of like dancing with the emotion. So you're not running from it. We're not, oh, I'm gonna go work out and blast rap in my ear so I forget about it, right? It's like, no, I'm dancing with it. I'm gonna run with this anger and I'm gonna let it move through me with
mm.
intention so that it can be dissipated, or released. And
Yeah.
so I think movement is huge. Of course, breath work is amazing. Um, and the music that we listen to,
Mm,
the words that we listen to, everything that we take in from our senses is going to affect our vibration. So choosing things that are going to raise that, words that are going to be a positive impact on our frequency, music that's going to be a positive impact on our frequency. If we're sad and we listen to sad music, we're probably going to keep being sad. So,
Mhm.
and what can we listen to that's going to stir your soul and bring a bit of a smile, or even just stir a little bit of movement?
Yeah. I can't watch scary movies because they raise my anxiety so
Yeah.
much. And so while a little anxiety is fun, that adrenaline, it's just like too much is not fun for me. So I can't watch scary movies. If you're watching horror or like murder or icky movies like that, that's affecting your vibration.
Yep.
Um, but then
100%.
on the back to the music, the frequency music, you can listen to certain hertz that have been made to match maybe your chakras, or there's even the Schumann resonance that really will help just begin to balance your body for you. And so there's some things that are like hacking your body for you. And then there's some things that you need to do with your body to begin to raise your vibration. And it's that
Yeah.
nice balance of doing both. Yeah, I love that.
Beautiful. I would love to invite any of our listeners to offer up their tips on what they do to raise their frequency, and and even maybe what is helpful when you're trying to change your perspective on what you're feeling, or how you change from that seat of being in it versus viewing it from a different observer lens. So welcome
Yes.
those things that we could maybe share later in our part two.
Yeah, feel free to comment below. Or we do have a private Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. You can join our private Facebook group. There's only me and Renee in there right now, but we would love to build the community of like-minded, not only just healers, but just like-minded people who are interested in being in this community with us.
Mhm.
Amazing. We hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.